Welcome back. The largest LGBTQ plus civil rights organization in America, known as the Human Rights Campaign, recently issued a national state of emergency for the LGBTQ plus community. This announcement comes after a recent increase in violence and harmful attempts towards anti-trans legislation. Founder and executive director of Destination Tomorrow, Sean Ebony Coleman, joins me to discuss the state of emergency and how efforts from extremist groups could harm members of this community. Sean, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, first, can you just talk a little bit about the organization, the Human Rights Campaign, and the work that they do for LGBTQ plus communities?
So, as you mentioned, HRC, or the Human Rights Campaign, is America's largest LGBTQ plus civil rights organization. So, in addition to something like this state of emergency, which is the first of its kind, it also looks at companies and municipalities to see how safe and affirming those spaces are for LGBTQ plus community members, and they give a rating, and then they issue reports to kind of give us a sense or a pulse on what's happening within LGBTQ communities. And what they did last week was they issued this state of emergency, which is long overdue. But what it does is it highlights some of the hateful legislation that's being drafted and in some cases passed against LGBTQ community members.
Now, you mentioned that this is the first of its kind, and that really stood out to me because as we're moving towards the future, right, it's 2023, the fact that something like this had to happen was very shocking to me. Can you just explain, your thoughts on seeing something like that?
Well, yes, in some ways it had to happen. It was destined to happen. History often repeats itself. I think what's happening now is folks are feeling like members of the LGBTQ community are finally having representation, right? We're finally becoming integrated, if you will, in society. And I think for some folks it's a little scary, especially those folks who don't have a relationship or to actually know someone who identifies within the LGBTQ community. And I think this is a response to it, right? It's in some ways, it's kind of trying to draw back some of the rights and protections we've been able to secure over the last couple of years.
Now, what was the anti-trans legislation that led HRC to issue a state of emergency?
I don't think there's one piece, right? If you're paying attention, there have been over 525 bills that have explicitly been drafted that target the LGBTQ community, particularly more so the trans and gender nonconforming, non-binary community members. And in a lot of those instances, like in 20 states, a lot of it is already passed, right? The laws have already passed. And I think this was a way to kind of like call attention to the fact that right now there are some harmful legislators that are passing really nonsensical laws and within their respective spaces that do more harm than good to members of the LGBTQ community. And I think this was a perfect way to kind of like highlight what's happening. And like, this is a call to action from our allies. We're highlighting exactly what's happening to us. And we need folks to like really pay attention to it now.
Now, you brought up allies, and I want to touch on that. What can allies do to ensure that they're actually supporting the community? As we know, it's Pride Month, and a lot of people, it's a celebration. It's a moment to celebrate, the people that you love who are part of this community. But it also takes a lot of work, and sometimes you do have to address things like this. So what can allies do to be more supportive?
To your point, what allies can do to be more supportive is to like contact your legislators, especially if you're in a state that is proposing some of these laws, right? Show them your opposition to them. There's research that backs what we're saying, that there's nothing, especially with gender affirming care, it's healthcare, right? So if we and our allies are speaking in the same tone and the same voice, making the same points and referencing back to facts, there's no way that these types of laws can continue to be proposed and in some cases passed. So we need your voice at this point, right? We need you to be on the front line with us. We need you to be educated about exactly what's happening. And again, HRC did an amazing job with this state of emergency because you now can see these laws that are being passed and we need your help pushing back.
Now, a huge part of your work is, representing and supporting those of the trans community. Um, I understand that there's a huge focus on the trans community when it comes to these, these bills that are very
Yes.
harmful. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and how it kind of proves that, that when it comes to the LGBT, there's, everybody's going to have a different experience?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we really, really need to tease out, right? Because when we speak about it, we say these anti-LGBT laws, but in reality, they're actually anti-trans and gender nonconforming, non-binary laws. They're specifically targeting that section of our community, and again, we have to highlight the fact. Yes, we are part of the LGBT community, but the attacks that are happening to the trans and gender nonconforming, non-binary communities. And these attacks, these legislative attacks, also result in real violence towards these community members, to our community members. In that it's like almost like you dehumanize folks when you begin to have these discussions and when you begin to try to take ownership over someone else's body and their autonomy. And if you're able to do that, then what's to say that I can't harm you without worry that there's going to be some kind of sanction against me if our own government is already saying that something about this isn't correct. So it does a lot of violence, both as far as the laws and policies that are being passed, but also physical violence.
Now, I also want to talk about something called the anti-drag ban. This isn't
Yeah.
necessarily, I guess, a trans issue. I mean, it could be, but it's primarily for drag queens and performers, and a lot of people who want to ban that. Can you just detail and tell us a little bit more about what that's about?
For the life of me, I can't understand what, like, for years, actors have gotten into drag. There's Miss Doubtfire, and drag queens have entertained for a very, very long time. RuPaul's Drag Race is another example. So to now use this as a way to say, no, this is bad, and they're targeting children. How? When we've been educating and entertaining, when drag queens have been educating and entertaining forever. So it kind of is disingenuous to now say, well, this is a bad thing now. What makes it bad now? Right? We are making sure that like with Drag Story Hour in New York City, it's an amazing platform that goes in and educates in the form of reading to younger people, right? So you have diverse community members that are coming in and not just entertaining but educating as well. That should be win-win, and instead we are met with this kind of rhetoric around how it's a bad thing and it shouldn't happen. Absolutely makes no sense.
And now that you mentioned it, I'm like, yeah, like drag queens have been a part of like mainstream culture for a very long time. So as I mentioned earlier, in the interview, like I'm kind of shocked that like it seems like we're moving backwards when it comes to acceptance and representation, because like you mentioned, it's been around for such a long time.
We're allowing folks to come in and to divide us, right? And to make things that used to be innocent and fun to now be problematic. And instead of having a discussion around why this is actually happening, some folks are actually falling into the nonsense and believing or championing some of the things that just don't make sense. And I think this is a place for our allies to step in. Those folks that enjoy RuPaul's Drag Race and those other types of venues where drag queens are present and entertaining. For you to use your voice and say, this is something we've always done. Where's the harm?
Now, forced student outing and don't say gay bills primarily affect school-age children. What are your thoughts on educational institutions being this involved in a student's identity or even family home life?
Just like I don't believe doctors should be legislators should be involved in decisions between women and their doctors. I don't believe that educators should be doing that either. I think parents need to be able to parent their children in a way that they understand and that is safe and affirming for their child. A parent knows their child and they know what's best for them. We believe that in every other sense except in this sense, and I don't understand why the difference. If we're not managing everything that a parent has to do and say for their child, why is this different?
Now, as I mentioned, a lot of these bills affect the youth. How could the passing of these bills negatively affect, their experience as members of the LGBTQ plus community, or how they may view family members or friends who are a part of that community?
I think it's disheartening, right? It almost makes, as a black trans man, it makes you feel like you don't belong, you're not accepted, and you're not wanted. And it's a horrible feeling to have. And it's especially horrible when it's amplified through government officials and policymakers to ostracize an entire community. So as a young person, I can imagine that they're concerned about their future. What type of future are you guaranteed if laws that are being passed to remove you or not include your very existence? They're telling you your existence doesn't matter. So I'm sure it's disheartening, which is again why we have to support our young people. And then the second part to that is they're also doing it to adults as well. They started in the schools, and maybe that was the easiest way to start and get this divisive message out. But there's only a matter of time before they start um, uh, saying what kind of medical care that all trans people can receive. And I believe in Mississippi they did, but in all that all trans people can receive. So if we're not going to be responsive now, the attacks are just going to continue to happen, and they're going to be extended to all members of the trans and gender nonconforming non-binary community.
Now, how can people from other states find safe and legit services to support them? I think that we're lucky in New York that a lot of New Yorkers, we have resources here in New York, and I'll get you to talk about those as well. But can you talk about in other states, how can people make sure that they're going to organizations that are legit and actually support them?
Well, that's so two parts to the question, right? I think the first thing is, yes, we are lucky in New York. And actually, Mayor Adams just signed an executive order stating that anyone that comes to New York City for any kind of gender affirming care for their young person, they don't have to worry about sanctions when they go home. They have the full protections of being here. And if there's any kind of legal action that the state that they're from would try to get us to like extradite them back or send them back for those purposes, we won't. So New York City is a safe haven again for those seeking trans and gender nonconforming care. I think that's what's most important. I think the second thing is to find resources in those sanctuary cities, right? Because we can connect. I know at Destination Tomorrow, we can connect you to services that may be close to where you are, or find ways to bring you in other cities or states that will be able to help you with the care that you need.
Now, I know we've talked so many times about your organization, so I know about
Yes.
it. But for those who don't know, can you just let everybody know what your organization does to support this community?
So Destination Tomorrow is the Bronx LGBTQ Center. We just had Bronx Pride. It was an amazing event. Every year we get about 6,000 people to come out and party with us. This year was no different. We have a lineup of talent that comes through. We have some drag queens, so that come through and hang out with us. And it's just an amazing time. But outside of that, we're a direct service organization, and we focus on economic empowerment. So job readiness, GED, financial literacy, life skills. Those are some of the primary things that we started with. The organization has grown. We opened in 2009, and we've grown tremendously since. We're now doing housing. We have a food pantry. We do HIV testing. We're really just a one-stop shop for the LGBTQ community in the Bronx and surrounding areas. And we've expanded. We've grown. We opened a location in Atlanta, Georgia last
Wow,
year. And
congrats. That's amazing.
thank you. And I'm happy to report we just received the first funding ever for an LGBT organization in the city of Atlanta of $25,000 to do mentorship programs for LGBT youth. And I think that's important because, to your earlier point, what must these young people feel like? With mentors that we're going to connect them to, we're going to make sure that they are emotionally and mentally well, so they can continue on whatever course of their life takes them on. Whether that's that they're going to continue being part of this community, whatever these young people decide, we want to make sure that we connect them to mentors that they can relate to and that have the same lived experience. So we get through this together. So we're super excited about the work that we're doing in Atlanta, and there's some more expansions that are in the pipeline. So we're super excited about the work that we do.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and educating everybody on this topic. It's so important. So once again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
To stay in touch with Destination Tomorrow, please go to their website at www.destinationtomorrow.org or follow them on Instagram at Destination Tomorrow 452. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more open right after this.